So this is 1880 China by Double O Games, which, as you can see from the front of the rulebook here, is by Helmut, Ohley and Lonny Orgler, who have designed a number of 18xx games. This is quite a large one, as you can see from the map there, stretching off and sort of blending in with the beige of the table at the back there. I don't really cover 18xx games. I enjoy playing them, I enjoy the decision space of them, but I find filming them extraordinarily difficult for a couple of reasons. One is that there's too much information to capture in a particular shot. You can't film a frame which tells the story or indicates the board state. The board state is indicated by all kinds of stuff, what trains are available and coming up and which ones are therefore about to rust. In this game it has work permits, the green things up there with the letters on them. You need to know what's happening with those. You need to know what shares are available and what's sold out, and then you need to know what prices those shares are going for. You need to know what earnings per share are happening. You need to know what corporations are available to open. You need to know what tracks are available to build and what it's going to be worth when you've built it and what it's going to connect to once it's built. So you have to be able to assimilate the progression of the way you can build. So you'll build yellow tiles, then green, then brown, then grey. You need to be aware of the progression there. And then each of the players, in this case I've got 5 players, you need to be aware essentially of each of their tableau. So they will have a tableau which will be made up of 1 or 2 or no private companies, some share companies, a private investor, and each of it, they'll have their own cash. Their private investor will have cash, each of their companies will have cash, their companies will have tokens for stations, their own treasury, their own trains. It all amounts to a sort of information overload when it comes to trying to film it. So building a narrative around what's going on is quite challenging. I'm having a bit of an experiment in this game, because what I've tended to find when I've tried to play multi-handed solo in 18xx is that each of the players or all the players become kind of homogenized. You end up with one fixed idea about what the game state is, and then all of the players that you're playing end up basing all their decision around that one fixed idea of the game state, rather than them each taking an individual view of value and options and prospects and so on, and making decisions based on alternate views of the game state. So to try and work around that, I've given the 5 players a little name and a little identifier, so that to try and spur me to look at the game differently from each of their different points of view. So we have Balanced Brian, who's player 1 at the moment, Cautious Kate, Payout Paul, Reckless Rob, and Train Mad Tina as our 5 players here. And those names don't mean anything per se, but they're just trying to give me a nudge to reassess the game their situation from a different perspective. So Reckless Rob will look at things differently, we hope, from Cautious Kate, and Train Mad Tina will look for opportunities to buy trains or more trains where others might not, and so on. So I'm going to try and build the narrative around the decisions of each of the players, rather than try and capture this enormously complex game state, and see how I get on. What I'm not going to try and do right now is explain the rules of 18xx or 1880 in particular, because there's just too much to it to try and summarize it. It would take me far too long to even try, and I'd be making mistakes, and then people who really know the game and know the 18x genre would be going, no, that's not quite right. So I won't do that. Instead, what I'm going to do is just work through the game as it sort of unfolds, and when we reach interesting points, at that point I'll try and explain a little bit about the decision that a particular player has got to make, and that should illustrate a little bit more of the gameplay, and we'll try and do it that way rather than try and capture all of the gameplay and then try and capture all the decisions. It's just not possible. So without further ado, what I've done so far is just dealt out some cards to work out the player order and then reordered the players. Balance Brian's first, Cautious Kate. We're going clockwise, but I'm starting here so that I go down the line down there. And what they've got to do is auction these 7 private companies. And so the first thing is the first player, which is Brian, will put the first of these companies, which is this one, up for auction, and it starts at 5, so he can either pass or bid 5, or those are his 2 options. He can pass or bid 5, or bid higher than 5, but he can pass or make a bid, and then it will go down. If everyone passes, we end up with a situation where its price drops to 0, and then he's forced to take it. And we will do the same for this one, the Kaiping Railway. Will start at 10. If everyone passes, it'll go to 5. If everyone passes, whoever put it up, which will be Cautious Kate, player 2 here, she will get it for free. And then we hit these other 5 and the situation there changes slightly. Let's just do the first 2, and I'll come back on a separate bit of film for that. Okay, so let's have a look at these private companies then and see what's interesting or special or unique about each of them. We've got the Woonsong Railway to be auctioned first. Then we've got Kaiping Railway, we've got the Yanda Ferry Company, we've got Taiwan Western Line, we've got the Chinese Rivers Ferry Company, we've got the something Tianyao, Jamie Tianyao Engineer Office, we've got the Imperial Qing Government, and we've got the Rocket of China last. So you can see the cost and the income for each of these, and you'll see similar sort of ratios a lot of the time. Moving down then, this costs 5, or the opening bid needs to be 5, but it could go for as little as 0. It brings no income, but when the last 2+2 train is bought, you can exchange it for 40, or when the last 3 train is bought, you can exchange it for 70, or when the last 3+3 train is bought, you can exchange it for 100. So it's sort of cash in the bank waiting to be redeemed, essentially. This has no special power, it just costs 10 and pays 5 every operating round. This costs 25 and pays out 10, so you can see it's taking 2.5 operating rounds to pay you back its initial cost if it goes at face value. Its special power is that as part of your route you can use, there's 3 ferry lines printed on the map like this. There's one here from Shanghai up to Qingdao up here, and you can see it printed there, and using that ferry route it acts like printed railway line, but it reduces your income from that operation by 10. And there's others up across this bay, one here and one in here. If you've got the ferry company, you don't have to pay that 10. Your costs for using those lines are 0, so you can run more profitably on these coastal routes from Shanghai and south out of, I can't read the name, Dalian or something, the city up there. So that's what this does. This one, the Taiwan Western Line, means you pay 45, it has an income of 15, so it pays you back in 3 turns and then starts making you profit. And it increases the value of Taiwan by 20. So Taiwan is here. The payouts throughout the game as the phases change are 30, 30, 0 and 0. That will become 50, 50, 20, 20. So it boosts the value of Taiwan. Then we have the Chinese Rivers Ferry Company, costs 70, 20 income. And its power is that the first time you build a river in a river hex, which would normally cost 20, it costs you 0 instead. In other words, it reduces the cost to build on a river hex by 20. If you build on a mountain river hex, mountains are normally 30, mountain rivers are therefore 50, then it reduces the cost by 20, so you just pay the mountain cost. This engineer's office gives you an automatic work permit for the D phase, so the last phase of the game. It means that you can assign a work permit to one of your companies. It costs 100, it gives you 25 income, so it pays back over 4 turns, 4 operating rounds before you're starting to make profit. And this one here, no income. This one is like the I can't remember the name of the company, but this there's a similar thing in 1830 where buying this gives you a 20% share of a corporation. So you will get the director's certificate in this railway here, BCR, and then that will automatically be operating as you go into the first operating round. These 2 yellow hexes, I believe, indicate that the BCR has a special power, which is that early in the game, in the opening phases of the game, other corporations can only lay 1 track tile on the map. These track tiles here, which are going to what are going to connect up the cities and allow trains to operate, train companies to operate and make money. This, I think, indicates that it can lay 2 track tiles per operating phase rather than 1. And obviously it makes no income, it's just going to be turned into or give you the 20% share of the Baocheng. The Baocheng railway, this company, when it floats, launches, the share price is automatically set at 100. So if you bought this at face value at 160, you would end up with 200's worth of shares straight away. So maybe it's worth more than 160. On the other hand, it is located here on the edge of quite a lot of mountains, a long way from the most valuable hub, certainly in terms of the cities up here, which is going to be Beijing, and Shanghai on the coast is also going to be worth a fair bit. So it's out of the way in sort of southwestern China here. So perhaps not the most welcome spot for your first corporation, or maybe it's great, who knows. But anyway, it may be that this is worth more than 160, or it may be that it's not. And the final sort of bit of a wild card thing here, costs 50, no income. What this gives you though is at any time between the 2 and the 4 trains, you can trade it in for essentially a free train. You can just trade this in and say, give me a train, and I think you have to take one when the first 4 train is bought. So if the first 4 train is bought, you immediately train this in for the second 4 train. But at any point prior to that, you could trade it in for another train. And if you look at the price of trains, they start at 100, and a 4 trains goes for 300. So it's kind of interesting idea that you might pay 50 up front and have something in your pocket that's gonna land you a 400 yen train in the future. Yeah, interesting. Not sure what this is going to go for, although obviously someone like Train Mad Tina, who might lean towards wanting lots of trains, might be very interested in the Rocket of China, whereas Cautious Kate might not want the gamble on it. So there it is. So what we're going to do is go round. Our opening player is going to auction the first one, the Wusong Railway, and once that's sold, we're going to get Kate to auction the Kaiping Railway. Then Paul's going to auction the Yanda Ferry Company, and then Rob is going to auction the Taiwan Western Line. Tina is going to auction the Chinese Rivers Ferry Company. Then we're going to come back up here. Brian is going to auction the Engineer Office. Kate is going to auction the Imperial Qing Government with the BCR, and then Paul is going to auction the Rocket of China Wildcard Company. And yeah, there's just a little bit of subtlety in this, and a little bit of a gap in the rules, which I'll just mention, which I think we need some actual rules for before we go into conducting the auction, because it helps if everyone knows what's going to happen. So where the gap in the rules is that if we once we've auctioned these two, if no one buys one of these, then what happens is that there's an operating round in which the ones that have sold pay out their income. So what that means is that anyone who's, well, apart from someone who's bought this, but anyone who's bought one of these, for example, just gets an automatic free payout, which is to the disadvantage of all the other players. And then we go back into another auction round. So the players really don't, no one wants to let, 2 or 3 of these sell and then see the people that have bought them get a free payout before we carry on. So the incentive is to put bids in. However, what the rules say is that if you do that payout round, and then you go back into an auction round, it says they must be auctioned in the following share round. In other words, if you do a payout round and then you come back into an auction to sell the rest of these, they must sell. But what it doesn't say is how you enforce that. In other words, if we sell this and then we sell this, and then no one buys the Yanda Ferry Company, and this pays out to whoever bought it, and then we come back and auction this, if everyone passes, what happens? The rules are silent on that. They simply say it must be auctioned. Does it keep going round and round and round and round with everyone passing and refusing to buy it until it doesn't say. It simply says once they've all been auctioned, but it doesn't say how you enforce the sale of it. So the rule that I'm going to say is that whoever puts it up for sale, if everyone passes, that person buys it at face value. That's the simplest rule I can come up with. So we auction off the Wusong Railway here, Kate auctions off the Kaiping Railway here. If the Yanda Ferry Company comes up for, if we then have a round where they pay out and then we come back into a second auction, from then on, if it would be Paul putting this up for auction, and if it didn't sell, he'd be forced to buy it at 25, and then this guy, Rob, would be auctioning off the Taiwan Western Line. If he didn't sell it, if no one bought it, he'd be forced to buy it at 45, and so on. So the way I'm going to enforce the purchase in the second share round, if there is one, is that the person launching the auction is the buyer if there are no other takers. That was probably a slightly longer and messier explanation than we needed. I'm going to stop here and have a think about what the players are likely to do. Okay, so one thing to understand about the private companies that we're auctioning is that they stop paying out, they stop doing anything. Well, no, they stop paying out when the first 4 train is sold. You can still use their special powers if they have any after that, so the ferry company will still make the ferries free after this, but they stop paying you their income. So you're going to get their income for the 2 trains, the 2+2s, the 3s and the 3+3s when the first 4 is sold. They stop paying out. So Brian, our first player, is looking at this Wusong Railway, and specifically he's been comparing it to this Kaiping Railway. This costs 5, pays out nothing, but at various points you can take a payout at the last 2 plus 2 40, at the last 3 70, at the last 3 plus 3 100. This costs 10 and is paying out 5 per operating round. What that means is that if you take the 100 when the last 3 plus 3 is sold, that needs to be happening. If that happens earlier than the 21st operating round, this has been better than this, because this would need to have paid out 21 times to pay you 105 at a cost of 10, 95 profit. This, if it's taken less than 21 operating rounds, you're better off with this than you are with this. And our first player, Brian, is pretty convinced that the Wusong is going to be ahead there. Now, you could argue that, yes, this is giving you your money throughout the game, and therefore you've got a chance to invest it, but it's so little. You've often got a spare 15 or 20 bucks around. It's very difficult to have invested your money exactly to the last dollar, and so the chances of that $5 or $10 being the difference, he doesn't think is that great. He thinks this overall looks like a far better option. And he can cash it in earlier if he wants to. He can cash it in for 40 at the 2 plus 2, so he's not even forced to wait. So there's opportunities to cash it in. It's just a better bet than this. So he doesn't want to let other people take it. Our first player is Balanced Brian. He's going to put a 5 bid on this. Our second player is Cautious Kate, and she is not about to start bidding over face value for private companies of dubious worth. So she's going to pass. And in these auctions, once you've passed, you don't get to re-enter. So having passed, she doesn't get to re-enter the race. And this is also unlike 1830, where you could alternatively put sort of bids for later on these. You don't get to do that. You get to bid on the thing that's up for auction or pass. So she's passing. Payout Paul, he doesn't like the look of it. It's got no income. He wants steady income. He doesn't want this gamble on a later outcome. So he's passing. Reckless Rob, though. Reckless Rob has done much the same sort of idea up and down the line as our first player, Brian. And he also reckons that if he bids 10 and gets 100 back on this, a 90 profit, he will be comfortable with that, because he thinks the timescales involved also will allow that to be competitive with the other things out there. So he's bidding 10 on the Wusong, and Train Martina doesn't want any part of it. So it's over to Brian as to whether he wants to go to 15 on this private company. And he's looking along the line thinking, well, what else am I going to be first bidder on? Or what else am I going to get to auction? So this will be player, this will be Kate, this will be Paul, this will be Rob, this will be Tina. He will get to auction the engineer officer, and he quite likes the look of the engineer officer. It's got a nice big income, and this D work permit means that he could get a corporation up and running early and know that it can build track all game. And he quite likes the look of that because he's Balanced Brian, and that seems like quite a good plan as well. So he's not going to go to 15 on the Wusong. He's going to give it up. And so Rob over here, Reckless Rob, is going to take that for 10, and I've given all the players the 400 starting cash they've got. So there's 10. And now we're auctioning this Kaiping Railway. Cautious Kate. I has first dibs on this. Oh. And you know what? It's hard to get around the feeling that it's crap. And she's thinking it's crap. And she's also the one putting it up for auction. And if everyone thinks it crap, she might get it for 5. She certainly doesn't want to pay 10 for it. If someone else wants to pay 10 for it, then she'll happily let them. So she's passing to see if it passes all the way around and everyone's of the same opinion. She'll have a think about it for 5. Payout Paul doesn't really like the look of it. It doesn't look as good as the Woo song that just went for 10. Why would you buy this for 10? He's passing. Reckless Rob's just paid 10 for something that looks better than this. Why would he pay 10 for it? He's passing. Train Mad Tina doesn't like it either, really. She's passing. The only question then is, Brian, our first player, does he want to give it to Kate for the 5? Does he want to give it to her for 5? Well, even if he does, she's only making 5 extra on it. It's certainly not, he doesn't think it's worth paying 10 for either. So he's going to pass it round to Kate, who's now got the option of it at 5, and she will bid 5 for it. And I think at that point no one's going to go up to 10, otherwise they could have just had it for 10. So she is going to get this for 5. And she pays her $5 and is relatively content with that as a piece of business. So now Paul, our third player, is going to auction the Yander Ferry Company. And these things start to get a little bit more interesting now. So firstly, we don't want to pass this all the way round, because if we all pass it all the way round, then Kate, who's just got the Kaiping Railway, just picks up 5 for free, 5 yen for free, and then we start again. So let's not do that. It's got 10 income, which is paying you back in 2.5 turns. And the ferry company looks like it could be quite cute. So the ferry company looks like it could work. Obviously it looks like it could work very nicely with this HKR railway out of Shanghai. And it could also work with the German private investors who are based here, or the Japanese ones who are based up here, although they don't look very well placed. But it could work okay with these guys. Or if you're going to run a company out of Shanghai, maybe you can try and hook up with the British investors down here or the Portuguese investors down here. So one of the things I should sort of explain, these private investors are like mini corporations, and everyone's going to get to choose one after we've done the auctions of the privates, and they will go about their business building a bit of track and running whatever the current train is to make themselves some income, like a separate little self-contained company. And then when you join up your company with their company, you get bonus shares and bonus payouts and whatever money they've managed to accumulate and stuff like that. That's not the full rules, but that's the gist of it. There's subtleties and intricacies, but that's the gist of it. So for example, if you were in Shanghai, you might want the British investors here to try and link them up. So the question tends to be around how much risk you're willing to take, not hooking them up or having to wait to hook them up. So for example, if you opened the JGG line here, the Jingguang Railway out of Beijing, and had the Belgian investors here, obviously you could easily join them up. There's a one-tile lay to do so. But in that time, the Belgian company will not have made any money really, and so will not have anything to transfer to you. Whereas if you are willing to take the risk and start the SCR down here, the Xichang Railway, but have the Russian investors all the way up over here, you've got ages and ages for the Russians to try and make money, but you might never end up hooking up to them and actually claiming it. So there's a sort of risk-reward element thing going on here, where you get this, everyone's going to automatically get to choose one of these companies, one of these private investment companies, and it's there's interesting choices to be made there. Anyway, we're back with this guy here, and he's looking at this Yander Ferry Company, and actually 10 income at an investment of 25, and extra cash for the from the coastal routes for the whole game. Looks pretty cool. He's going to put 25 down on that. And now it's over to Reckless Rob, who is thinking about, he's got his Wu Song Railway. Does he? He's going to get to auction off the Taiwan Western next. Looks okay. He's already paid 10. Does he want to go 30 on this as well and start paying over the odds for everything? Well, he is Reckless Rob, but he's not feeling that reckless. So he's going to pass on the Yander Ferry Company for now. Train Mad Tina. Train Mad Tina. Difficult to know what she's thinking on this. I'll come back. Well, Train Mad Tina passed on it, but then Balanced Brian put a 30 bid on it, because he reckons it's a decent way of hooking up. So he reckons with that ferry company, you could look at a route that came out of Beijing, for example, through this city here, up through this city here, down the coast, down here, and down into Shanghai. He reckons there might be some tasty routes to be had with this ferry company. Making the most of them. So he went 30. And now paying out Paul, who also likes the look of it, has a decision to make about going 35 on it. And you know what? I think for this game he'll go 35. Everyone else has passed. Brian isn't going to go 40. And so it's going to go over here for 35. Let's just pop that 35 back in the bank, which is on a chair down to my left, because this game takes up a lot of table space. Okay, so now we have Rob auctioning the Taiwan Western line. And let's have some thoughts on this and not just sort of sit here sighing on camera. Okay, so the players have been having a think about this Taiwan Western line, and Rob especially, who's put it up for auction, is thinking that buying this sort of puts you in competition with whoever's got the ferry company, because you're both going to be looking at coastal routes. So it's a gamble buying this, because to get the most value out of it, you want this plus 20 bonus for running into Taiwan. But to run into Taiwan early, you're going to need to start one of a very limited number of companies. You want one of the SCR, possibly this Wuhan, possibly this Nanjing, or the Shanghai Railway. And that's going to be, with 4 companies around that can all make a reasonable attempt at getting to Taiwan, it doesn't seem too much of a gamble. And he doesn't just want to pass it around and then end up with people who've got companies getting paid out. So a 45 bid seems reasonable, and he'll put that down. Tina doesn't really want it. Brian has his eye on the engineer's office. Cautious Kate doesn't want to pay over the odds, and Paul, no, he's not going to pay 45-50 for it either. It's just a little bit too risky. It's quite situational. So he's going to get this for the face price of 45. Let's pay 50 into the bank, put 5 back. There we go. And now Tina down the end here is going to get toward auction the Chinese Rivers Ferry Company. Now this has got this one-off -20 for building on a river hex. Again, that's quite situational, but there is quite a lot of river. It does also pay out 20 around though for your 70 investment, and she doesn't have a private yet. However, unlike, I don't know if I've mentioned this, but unlike in 1830, again, one of the things you don't get to do is flog these at inflated prices into your corporation and therefore use them as a way of milking cash straight out of your corporation into your own pocket. That does not happen. So there isn't quite the same desire to get private companies, high-value private companies, to sell them at twice the price and pocket the cash. However, she'll bid the 70 because she wants a private company and she quite likes the 20 income. And I can't see anyone else wanting it, given how other people are thinking. So she's going to pick that up at the base price of 70. So let's extract the 70 cash from her, and then we're going to move on and do the last of these. The engineer's office is being auctioned up here by Balanced Brian. He's had his eye on it for a while. He's going to put the 100 bid straight in. He quite likes the D work permit. He likes the 25 income. He'll happily pay 100 for that. Kate isn't going 105. Paul quite likes the look of the payout, because that would be giving him 35 a turn in income, and the D permit. Yeah. 35 in income and a D permit. He'll go 105. Reckless Rob has got 2 privates. He's not that interested. He wants to see what's going to happen when we get to the share round and we start capitalising companies. Particularly, he might quite like to capitalise a company at 100 with 3, at 30%. Although I'm not sure. Yes, you can. You can open at 30%. So he doesn't want to go spending 100 on the engineer. Trey Martina doesn't either. Paul's gone 105. Brian is going to scowl and offer the 110 for it, and that's going to be too much for anyone else to want to go to, so he is going to fork out the 110 required. And now we get on to this 160 beast here, which is the one that comes with 2 shares of the BCR, which par at 100 a share, and that is being auctioned by Kate here. And she might be cautious But that does look like a deal, doesn't it? 200's worth of shares for 160. Even that someone as cautious Kate thinks that is value. She's happy to start the BCR at for 160, and she will bid the 160. Now, Paul would. He'd bid her up, but he's got the Yander Ferry Company, and what that means is that he's more interested, he's more invested in starting the HKR out of Shanghai and getting something going on down the coast to make the most out of this private. So he'd be bidding purely out of spite rather than because it fits in with what he really wants to do. And if he did that and he got it at 165, then he hasn't got enough money to float the companies he really needs, and he's stuck way over inland with a ferry company, which seems like a very stupid thing to do. He'll pass on the BCR, on the Imperial Queen government, which leads to the BCR. Similarly, reckless Rob. He might be reckless, but he doesn't. Again, he's got the Taiwan line, and he wants to hook that up perhaps with something, either an investor, a foreign investor, or a railway line around Taiwan. He's not super interested in inland railways coming out of Chengdu. So he's going to pass. Train Mad Tina. Train Mad Tina is a conundrum. She hasn't got any particular reason not to want some value out of the Imperial King government, and she's also got the ferry company, which could help her, for example, build into Chongqing here or across the river here, depending on which way that wanted to go. So she could utilise her cash investment in the Rivers Company early and get some early value out of it. That looks like it's got some synergy. She'll go the 165 and stay in the bidding. Balance Brian. He thinks 170 is a viable bid for something that's going to have 200's worth of shares. 200 so it's gone 160, 165, 170. Will she go 175? Yes, she will. Tina will go 180. And Brian doesn't want to go 185 on it, and it's going to go down here at 180. And then we've just got this rocket to do, which I'll just come back to in a bit. So after quite a lot of competition of extremely dubious wisdom, Train Mad Tina picked up the Rocket of China, being Train Mad. She paid 70 for this rather than 50, and she's down to 80 yen. But she does have a private, the thing that's going to launch the BCR, and a train in her back pocket. So she's relatively comfortable with that position. Reckless Rob here has got the Wusong Railway, a Taiwan Western Line. Payout Paul just the Yander Ferry Company. Cautious Kate just the Kaiping Railway. And Balance Brian has got the Engineer down here. Now what we do is we reorder all of the players in terms of how much cash they've got from least to most. So this is going to be our first player, but a lot of the others have got quite a lot of cash left. I think he's going to be second, third, fourth, fifth. And then on that basis, they're going to get to choose their private investors, and that's going to then lead us off into the game. So I'm going to just reorder things, pick the private investors, maybe on this one, or maybe I stitch these together because it's been quite long. I think I'll do the private investors at the start of the next one.